So good news, everybody. You are in the right place. The tech has worked and you're joining the UK chapter of the International Coach Federation for the new reality, a coaching community. As many of you know, the UK chapter normally holds an annual conference in May. And this year, we're braving it like many others and going online. I'm Felicity Hodkinson, current president of the UK chapter, and I'm delighted to kick us off for the first of 4 afternoons of amazing live content. I'm going to welcome you, give some appreciation, reflect on coaching, and I have 3 asks. So, first of all, a huge welcome to you all. It's a little bit weird being here and not being able to see your faces, but I know that you're out there. It's a joy to be together for our first event on this scale, taking place during International Coaching Week and in the year that we're celebrating 25 years of association. We've had over 1,000 registrations for this event. Absolutely mind-boggling and brilliant. Thank you. And it's been great to see familiar faces and new names join us. So on behalf of the board and the conference team, we welcome you all. We bring you this event in partnership with our platinum sponsor, Coach Hub, and powered with technology from WBEX. It is no mean feat to say that without the financial and technical contribution from our sponsors, we wouldn't have been able to turn this around. You have truly given us the flexibility to do this within 6 weeks and not the 6 months I think it probably would take under normal circumstances. We are a small organisation led by a team of volunteers, and like many other not-for-profits, we really heavily rely on not just member income, but working in partnerships with organisations who have a like-minded intention to ours. So thank you for being along the ride with us. To continue with the appreciation, I would really like to acknowledge our speakers. So for those of you who are joining us for this first session, thank you. We wouldn't be here without your adaptability and your flexibility. You have flex content and delivery mode, and for that we are truly grateful. You've given a lot of time already in terms of conversation and diary planning. So thank you for that, and we look forward in anticipation to the content that you're going to bring us this afternoon and the rest of this week. So if we hadn't been disrupted by COVID-19, I would have been opening on the stage at County Hall in London tomorrow in front of about 400 of you. So I'm appreciative that we're able now to bring this content to many, many more of you, and that's really exciting. But first of all, I want to do an appreciation for those of you who did buy tickets for that original event. Thank you for your patience for waiting for ticket refunds. We've worked through a really challenging situation with the event venue, and that is now resolved. Although I know our finance director will be, only be satisfied. TA, this is a shout out for you. Thank you for all the work that you've done. She will only be satisfied when we actually see the money back from the venue in our account. As a chapter, we've been putting interests of our members at the heart of our decision making, and whilst ensuring we maintain viability as an organisation. And one of the decisions that we made was to offer this event free to our chapter members. And the other was to ensure, that it was at a good, affordable price for some great content and could be made available to a really wide audience. So ask number 1, we would really love to hear your feedback about how we've been doing and responding to the needs of our coaches and our members. You can find a link to a survey about how we've been responding to COVID-19 on the homepage. So if you go to the homepage of the Wova app, you'll see a number of little buttons, and one of those is called COVID-19. So click on that, and over the course of this week, just give us some feedback about how you think we've been doing. It's based on your feedback that we will change what we do over the next 6 to 9 months. So it's really valuable. Thank you. The second ask is really for you to show us your love. We hugely value that you have shown up for us today and over the course of this week. It really does make a difference to the work that we do as a volunteer team to know that you are out there and that you are responding to what we are offering. So if you love what we're doing and you'd like to show your appreciation, our first request, if you haven't already done so and you're an ICF member, is to renew. That would be brilliant and much appreciated. The second request is, if you would like to, and in the interest of supporting the wider community and the work that we're doing, if you would like to donate more, you can do that. And again, if you go to the home page on your Wova app, you'll see a number of little boxes, and one of those is donate. And this is there for you to show your appreciation for what we've done in terms of going and responding to the situation that we're all facing at the moment. If we, and it's a really big if at the moment, but if we do make any profit, we will be donating 50% of any profit made to the two initiatives that we're supporting, coaching initiatives that we're supporting that support NHS staff. So that's where any additional funds will go towards. So go to the donate button on those on the homepage of the Wova app. My next appreciation, and there is a lot to be really appreciative here, is to the team. Team, you have been exceptional. And I don't just mean the conference team, I mean everybody. Over the last 6 or 7 weeks, you have blown me away with what you have done. There has been creativity, challenge, and relentless ambition to pull off initiatives and work, and particularly this conference, in such a short period of time. Kathy, Magda, Jane, and the team at CL Events, thank you, thank you, thank you. To do this alongside your own personal challenges that you've been experiencing with COVID has just been exceptional. And really a big sign of the dedication you have towards the coach community. So just to sort of change pace a little bit, I really want to reflect on the spirit of together that is showing up at the moment. And it is only by working together that we are here today. It may not have always been easy, and I don't expect the next 4 days to go without a hitch. It will give us some learnings, and that's what coaching is about. COVID-19 has really reminded us, and certainly me, of one thing. It's that when we unite around common purpose, that change happens. When there is alignment of self-interest and interest towards the collective, we see shifts in beliefs and systems, and those shifts in society can happen. And yet the relationship between one's own self-desires and what's in the interest of the whole and the wider community is perpetually tricky. It requires attention. So what will continue to support and unite a solidarity of action as we move into and through the next phase of COVID-19? As coaches, it is for each of us to explore how we play our role in this. And the team encouraged me to share a little bit of my own personal experience of what it's been like as a leader over the last 2 months. And it has been a massive roller coaster. So like many of you as coaches, I have been grappling with a significantly depleted coaching business. And the pressure of this has sat alongside the threat to the viability of the UK ICF chapter. And I know I'm really finding it tough and have been finding it tough because I have a habitual defense strategy which has been turning up really frequently, pretty much on a daily basis at the moment. And that defense strategy is to just withdraw and remove, run out the room, the door behind me, I'd be through it. So to stay in touch with things, to stay in something has taken a lot of resilience effort and energy. And I have to work hard to not see withdrawal as being in my best interests, to not turn away from action, to not be quiet, to not be alone. It takes huge effort to stay in touch with another part of me, which is the desire, a really strong desire to be purposeful, to contribute. And I always find myself at this boundary. And my coach and coaching over the last 2 months has been so key to helping me do this. It supports me to resource myself. It supports me to tune in and to see my defense pattern for what it is, a filter and a lens on how I interpret the world. And by seeing it as that filter and that lens, that enables me to then loosen it, to let go of it, and to see other choices, to see other possibilities. And that keeps me going forward. So thank you to my coach. I hope you're out there somewhere and joining us today. Thank you very much to you. So coaching matters. It matters personally. Of course, it matters to the choices that we make and to the systems and the change, but at the moment, it matters personally. It helps us thrive, not just survive. And that's why I'm an advocate of the ICF. That is our vision, to thrive, not just survive, for coaching to be an integral part of a thriving society. It builds bridges between what was, what is, and what could be. And those bridges are needed right now for thriving with COVID and for the impact of our actions on the planet. So as you listen and participate over the next 4 days, I ask you to hold a question that's relevant for you. You may want to use this one. Where, how, and when can your coaching support and unite solidarity of action? So where, how, and when can your coaching support and unite solidarity of action? So if we move on now to look at the shape of what we've put together, we really hope that over the next 4 days, that the combination of inspiring speaker content, cafe time for connection, and discussion space on the app will resource you to play your part as a coach in the new emerging reality. There should be something for everyone. And we by no means expect you to participate in it all. Choose what you want to, dip in and out of it. Make sure you've got a cup of tea along for the ride. We've got the 4 themes, one for each day: health and well-being, sustain and build, connect, and paradigm shift. We hope that there's going to be something for you to resource you in order to resource the work that you do. So the cafe time between our speaker sessions will give you a chance to chat with other coaches in small groups. So, you know, whether it's a small group of 2 or 3 or up to a group size of 20, you'll get to talk about the speaker content that may have happened or have a more open conversation. The Wova app has lots of threads for discussion and posing and asking questions and finding out information about the ICF. And in the e-program, which you'll find on the homepage under documents, you can find out about the whole program, the speakers, read up about ICF membership and chapter leadership vacancies. So some practicalities for today. We have an amazing team of hosts. So Liz will be hosting, supported by Lindsay Weir, and also Salma Shah will be running the cafes, and Magda is our program manager, who will always be in the back, making sure that everything goes smoothly. This is the team that will help you today find your way from session to session and make the most of what we're offering. So I look forward to meeting you through the different modalities, giving virtual high fives, smiles, hugs, and answering questions, and really having that participation with you. Not quite sure how it's going to work, but as I say, if it all goes smoothly, you know, there really will be a massive bottle of champagne for the team at the end of it, and there will be anyway. But just in case something goes wrong today, let's stay calm, let's smile, and let's do what we do best as coaches and have empathy, compassion, and lean in and learn from day to day. So let me invite Liz to join me on screen, and let's get started.
Hello everyone. I'm hoping you can all hear me. Thank you. So welcome. We are delighted to have you all here today and super excited to have our first keynote speaker of our event, Dr. Emily Grossman. And she is an internationally acclaimed science author, public speaker, science communicator and TV personality. She's an expert in molecular biology and genetics with a double first in natural sciences from Queen's College, Cambridge, and a PhD in cancer research. Emily's trained and worked as an actress and a singer, and actually as a maths and science teacher too. She now combines these skills in her role as a science broadcaster, writer, educator, and trainer. And she's co-founder of the group Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, and has given dozens of talks and media interviews on this subject. We're delighted to have her today. And she'll be speaking on, do coaches have a purpose on a changing planet? I know I'm absolutely intrigued about what she'll be challenging us on today. So over to you, Emily. Thank you for coming.
Good. I was going to say good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this amazing opportunity to do something I've never before done either, which is transferring what would normally be a live talk to an online platform like this. So growing up, my favourite word was why. I was constantly asking questions. It was like, what does this mean? How does this happen? Why does this work? I wouldn't accept anything unless people could give me an explanation that made sense. And I want to bring this to talking to you today about how I've tried to make sense of what's going on our changing planet, how I've tried to make sense more recently of COVID-19, but specifically in the last year of my journey, trying to make sense of the climate and ecological emergency. And I want to tie this together with who I am as a person and how that has helped me to combine my skills, what I'm passionate about, what I enjoy, and what's really important to me to find my own life purpose just in the last year. And this is at the end of at least 4 different careers. So I'd like to start with myself, aged 5, asking a million questions, driving everybody around me completely bonkers. I used to drive my teachers mad. My friends will tell you I'm still the same. But I was very lucky because I was really supported and encouraged by my family, by my friends, and by my teachers to kind of ask questions about the world. So from a very young age, it was really clear to me that one of my passions was making sense of things and figuring out what goes on in the world around us. So I naturally gravitated towards actually all subjects at school. I really loved school. I really loved learning. Didn't make me always that popular, but specifically towards maths and the sciences because I liked understanding the world. I also had another passion though, which actually for some came as a bit of a surprise because I was really passionate about theatre, about singing and dancing and performing on stage. So I loved expressing myself, I loved communicating with an audience, and I loved really getting inside a character and being able to use myself to kind of express emotions. So when people used to ask me when I was a kid, you know, that really annoying question that teachers and grown-ups ask you, it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'd be like, okay, well, I want to be a scientist and I want to be an actress. And they'd be like, oh, okay, that's a bit weird. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to choose. And I was mortified because I was like, I don't want to have to choose. I want to do both. I want to do both of the things that I love doing. And in fact, there was a third thing I loved doing, which was that I also really loved helping people, talking to people and sharing my knowledge, not just so that I could understand it, but so that others could too. Well, it's taken me 4 careers and nearly 40 years since that day to actually prove them all wrong, which is that I finally have found something that brings together all of the different things that I love doing, and more recently also combines that with a sense of purpose and a sense of doing something for the planet that really, really lights me up and turns me on. But it's been quite a long and tricky route to get there. So the teachers that knew me at school would say, okay, to begin with, certainly you're going to have to choose. And they gave me the great advice, which was to follow the academic route first, which meant studying maths and science at A level and keeping up my hobby for singing and musical theatre as just that, a hobby. So I was really excited to go. I got a place at Cambridge University to study natural sciences. My intention was always to do physics, but I actually very quickly lost my confidence and in a predominantly male environment, and ended up switching over to biology, which was a bit of a travesty and is actually something else that I speak about at various other talks about confidence and imposter syndrome, and why it was that in a male dominated environment, this idea that I wasn't the right sort of person, I didn't have the right personality, I was very sensitive and very emotional, needed a lot of reassurance, a lot of confidence boosting. But in the environment where there was a lot of confidence, a lot of seeming confidence in a macho sink or swim environment, I actually ended up thinking I wasn't good enough to do physics and finishing my degree in biology. Turned out I actually was, because when I did the physics exams at the end of the first year, having decided I was a complete failure, I did actually do better than most of the boys. But by that point, this imposter syndrome, as I now know it's called, had kicked in and had kicked me out. So I finished my degree in biology. I did lots of theatre and singing and dancing for fun. And then I decided to go up to Manchester University to do a PhD in cancer research. And again, I came across this sort of sense, this feeling in me that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't fit in, and that I wasn't really cut out to be a scientist because I was sensitive and emotional, which I now know is complete nonsense. And in fact, I've delivered a TEDx talk in recent years called Why Science Needs People Who Cry, which was 15 years later when I finally realized that this ridiculous stereotype that to be a scientist you have to be a certain way was damaging for everybody and was damaging for me at the time. But I did finish my PhD. It was one of the toughest things I've ever done. I kept up a lot of theatre and singing to kind of do in my spare time. And then I decided that I wanted to pursue the other thing that I loved doing, which was musical theatre. So I went to drama school. I trained as an actress and a singer at Guildford School of Acting. And I spent the next 8 years working in plays and musicals across London and across the UK. And I had a wonderful time. I really enjoyed that part of my career. I really loved what I was doing, but I still always felt that I was kind of having to put myself in boxes, that I was, you know, Emily, the actress by night, and actually during the day, I started working as a maths and science teacher in local schools. So I was kind of teaching by day and acting by night, and there were these two different boxes I had to put myself in. And they even told me to take off science PhD off my CV so that I could be seen, taken more seriously as an actress. So it was a really challenging time. I did that for about 8 years. And then quite honestly, I had a bit of a breakdown. I burnt out, I'd worked too hard, I hadn't looked after myself, and I spent a few years really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I felt like a square peg in a round hole. I felt like I hadn't fitted in, nothing quite worked, nothing quite made me feel that I was kind of doing what I was supposed to do on the planet. And I didn't know what that was. I had absolutely no idea. So there I was in my early 30s just going, I kind of feel like I failed as a scientist, I failed as an actress, didn't really feel like passionately aligned as a teacher. So even though actually I really enjoyed it and I was quite good at teaching, I was just like, I don't know what I want to do. And then eventually an opportunity came along through a scheme that the BBC were running called BBC Expert Women, where they were looking for female experts in science who also had some communication skills and might want to be experts in the media. Now, of course, on paper, looking back, you'd think this had my name all over it, as did my friends and family. But of course, my confidence by this point was so low that all I did is got into bed and put the duvet over my head and said, no way am I going to apply for this. But I did, from forcing really from a couple of very supportive people in my life. And I applied for this scheme and I got a place on this training day at the BBC. And I went along on this training day, there were 30 women they'd selected, and I went along thinking, oh my God, all these amazing women, they're going to be so brilliant. I can't believe I'm just going to be so embarrassed because I'm too old and I've been out of science for too long and I haven't got this experience and I'm not confident enough. And the first thing they said to us, they said, okay, we've got 30 women in here today to give you some media training, to give you support, how to be an expert, talking about science on the television. But actually, the reason we've brought you here is to give you some confidence, because we know that every single one of you thinks you're the one who shouldn't be here. And we all sort of looked at each other and out of the corners of our eyes and started giggling. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't just me, this is everyone. Everybody feels like this at times. And they said, yeah, this is called imposter syndrome. And actually, the reason why we need female experts on the television is because usually when we phone one, they'll have to phone 6 before one will say yes. The others will say, oh, it's not my field, I'm not expert enough, ask my boss, ask my husband. And incidentally, forgive me for gender stereotypes here, because there's a lot of men who also struggle with this, but incidentally, they said if they want an expert at all, they will phone a man and he will always say yes, even if it's not his field. I realise that there's a lot of women who don't fit into that category. There's a lot of men who actually do feel less confident, and there's a lot of people of in between genders who don't fit into that category anyway. But the point is that this imposter syndrome, this feeling of not being good enough, has pervaded my life, and it pervades the lives of a lot of people that I now work with. So from that day, I decided that I was going to kind of take the bull by the horns, armed with my newfound confidence. I was going to go out there and I was going to try and create a career for myself as what I called, I didn't know what to call it, but it's now apparently a thing, science communicator. So I said to them, you know, how do I become a science communicator? I want to be an expert. If really on the TV, I want to talk about this. I want to give talks about science. This really feels like it would fit my sort of 3 different passions and skills, which is making sense of things, helping others to make sense of things, and also using my confidence on stage, even though off stage I'm not confident at all. But when I'm kind of communicating in this way, I really come alive. And they said, well, that's not a job. Go back to your day job. Don't call us. We'll call you. But if we do call you, please say yes. And I was like, well, I want to try and do this. And I didn't know how. So I spent years knocking on doors, contacting TV and radio production companies, trying to find ways to find outlets to put myself out there as a science communicator. I made a website, said science communicator across the top. I mean, talk about imposter syndrome. I didn't even really know what that meant. I made business cards and took them to talks at the Science Museum and gave them out to people. And I literally just cold emailed schools, universities. I was like, can I come and give talks? I made little videos, made a YouTube channel, put them on YouTube, wrote blogs, wrote articles, just sent them off. And I was making a living just about as a tutor, so I could get by for a while as a science tutor. And eventually stuff started to happen. And it's been a long road, but now kind of like 8 years down the line from them, I now make my living full-time as a science communicator. I work for myself, obviously not at the moment. There's not much communication work around with COVID, but you know, I'm taking I hope well-deserved break for a while. But I love what I do now, which is that I am a science expert on various different radio and TV shows, such as a show on Sky called Duck Quacks Don't Echo. I give talks in schools and universities and public events and in corporate environments about science, about different science topics, also about confidence and careers and imposter syndrome. I write books and I write articles. I've just published my second book, which is called Brain Fizzing Facts, which is a book for kids about fun science facts. So, and the other part of what I do is I train people in communication skills and how to work with the media. So I really do love what I do, but even during all of that time, I could feel that, you know, I was doing what I loved, I was doing what I was good at, but there was still, I didn't have that core drive that like I was really making a difference in the world. Now, of course, I knew that I was helping to encourage young people to go into science, particularly women. But I could also feel that there was something bigger that was calling to me, and I didn't know what it was. Then, in fact, exactly a year ago, I'm going to try and show you my first slide. I went along to support my partner, Kimway. Oh, how do I do this? Here we go. Who was playing in the samba band at the Extinction Rebellion protests back last April. Now, my partner Kimway, I'll refer to him during the talk using his pronoun, which is he. He's non-binary trans, so he's assigned female at birth, doesn't want to change his assigned body, but goes by the pronoun he, him. And that in itself, engaging in that relationship about a year and a half ago, in itself has been a huge transition for me. I've only ever had relationships before with people who were cis male, heterosexual relationships, and there's many reasons why our relationship transition has been really inspiring and amazing for me, because we come from very different backgrounds, very different cultures, obviously different genders and gender and sexual orientations, but also we thought we had many different surface values on the world, but actually underneath all our values are the same. I live in a busy metropolis in London and have this very hectic kind of, at least I did, lifestyle. He lives in a van in Devon and works online as a music lecturer. So I'm now co-isolating with him down in Devon and actually finding that our lifestyles and values are actually pretty much identical. But anyway, so I went along to Extinction Rebellion protests a year ago to support him playing in the samba band. And I was like, what's going on here? I was listening to all these kind of protesters in the streets, and they were going, everyone's going to die, and mass extinction and ecosystem loss and societal collapse and 12 years to save the world, although they weren't. That's what the press were giving them a bad name for saying. They're actually saying something a lot more nuanced. But I was like, really? Can this really be true? This can't really be what's going on in the world. For three clear reasons. First of all, if this was really what was going on, we would be reading it on the front page of every newspaper. It would be on every news report. It would be on the 6 o'clock news. We would all know about this. This would be top of the agenda. Secondly, if this were really going on, the grown-ups, aka the politicians, naive as I was, would be doing something about it. They would be making sure it wasn't, or at least that they were addressing it. And thirdly, if this was really going on, someone like me, who's now committed my life to giving talks about hot science topics and being invited internationally to give talks on all sorts of areas to do with communication of science, surely I would have been asked by this point to write a book about this, or give a talk about it, or write an article about it, because it would be something that someone in the sort of mainstream science engagement world would certainly know about. Call me naive, call me ignorant, but I hadn't really known much about climate change since I studied it a little bit as part of my university degree. Turned out that I was pretty naive and was pretty ignorant. But what I decided on that day was like, okay, if I'm going to get on board with this movement, if only to support my partner, then to have any integrity, I need to go about and research and find out exactly what is the truth. Because part of my passion in the world has always been to get to the truth. I've actually recently self-identified as being high-functioning autistic, just like Greta Thunberg. So actually what drives me, a really big driver for me, is truth, is reality, and finding out what's really going on. So I was like, okay, I'm going to spend however long it takes, really digging deep and getting underneath what's actually going on the planet. Now, as a scientist, I know how to analyze information. I know how to go to primary sources. I know how to go to the right experts. I know how to read the right web pages. I know how to ignore most of what's actually out there on social media and on news platforms. So I did a deep dive. That was a year ago. Haven't stopped since, and I have to say, since that day, I have not had a single good night's sleep, because what I began to uncover through my research, through my talking to experts, was that things are way, way, way worse than I could have possibly imagined, and it is absolutely terrifying. And from that day, that is what's driven me, is to find out the truth, to get that truth out there, and to make sure that everybody knows the truth and that everyone is acting in line and in accordance with the truth. So from that moment, that became my life path. And finally, everything that I had thought, that I had been kind of waiting for this moment, for everything to collide in one place, for my desire to analyze information, to make sense of science, to help others to understand science, and to communicate it to the public on the TV, on the radio, by writing for kids, by writing for adults. I'm giving talks like this one. It's all kind of come into sharp focus. So a year ago, after I started to find this out, after a couple of months, I was like, right, I'm going to devote my life to doing this. This is the only thing that's important to me. So I'm going to spend the next part of this talk giving you a brief overview of what is going on the planet and what is going on that we should know about. A lot of you probably know most of this already. Some of you may know some of it. Forgive me if I'm saying anything that's really obvious to anyone. And if you have more questions about any of this, you can talk to me afterwards in the cafe. And I will end by then talking specifically about what I decided personally I needed to do about this. So this information I'm going to share has been through doing a lot of reading and also working closely alongside a group of scientists who are aligned with Extinction Rebellion, who've been helping me, and climate scientists, ecologists, world experts in these fields. So what's actually going on our planet? So the world has been getting warmer. I'm sure we all know this. Since the last 150 years, the average temperatures have been steadily rising until we get to where we are today. We are now 1 degree warmer than we were at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, that may not sound like much, but actually 1 degree warmer is an awful lot. For the Earth is so enormous that for it to heat up by 1 degree on average, and by the way, this is a common thing. People say, oh, but it's a bit colder where I live. Yes, of course, it's a global average. Some areas will temporarily get a bit colder. Most areas will get a lot warmer. It's much warmer at the poles, for example, as in relatively speaking. The warming is much more at the poles than it is at the equator. But global average over the years is gone up by 1 degree, even though some areas temporarily have gone down, and some years it goes down. And 1 degree, like I said, may not sound like much, but the Earth is so big that the energy needed to add to increase its temperature by 1 degree is so enormous, such an enormous amount of energy, that's the equivalent of 5 Hiroshima atomic bombs going off in the atmosphere every second. That's how much energy we are pumping out into the Earth's atmosphere. So this shows you over the last 150 years, another different representation of this is how the temperatures have increased. And the last 20 years, 19 of the last 20 years have been the hottest years on record. 2019 had the hottest July on record, and it keeps going up. If we look at this since year zero, since 0 AD, you can see very clearly here, if you look to the right, that we are way, way, way higher in temperature than we've been in a significant amount of time. In fact, in the last at least 100,000 years, it has not been this hot. And what's most significant is that we haven't had any sustained periods of warming this fast for the last 66 million years. That's before when that's when the dinosaurs went extinct. And the point is, we're going up so fast that it's not just how much we're rising by, but it's the fact that creatures don't have time to adapt or to move to different areas, because we've actually destroyed so much of our planet that creatures can't move to different areas anyway. So there's no time to adapt. So is this our fault? Why is this happening? And is this our fault? So yes, the evidence for man-made climate change or anthropogenic climate change is unequivocal now. And it's all to do with fossil fuels, with changes in land use, and with changes in farming techniques and breeding of livestock such as cows and sheep. So briefly, because I'm sure a lot of you know this, I'll explain this. So when humans burn fossil fuels, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, which is when a huge amount of fossil fuels started to be burnt. Fossil fuels release carbon dioxide, which is from carbon that's been trapped in the fossil fuels for millions of years, trapped under the oceans or trapped under the rocks. And when it's burnt, that carbon dioxide is released, and that carbon dioxide forms a layer in the atmosphere, acts as a greenhouse gas, which means that when the sun heats the Earth, when the Earth radiates some of that heat back out to space as infrared heat coming out, some of it gets trapped by the layer of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which include water vapor, carbon dioxide, and methane. Now, the greenhouse gas layer is actually really important. Without it, we'd all be too cold to survive at night. So it's not a poisonous toxic layer. It would be too cold because it would get to minus 18 at night and we wouldn't survive. However, it's getting too thick. So the main one, actually not true, one of the main culprits is the burning of fossil fuels to release carbon dioxide. Another one is the cutting down of trees, which trees normally absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When you cut them down, they stop absorbing. If you then burn them, they actually act as emitters of carbon dioxide. And another huge one is intensive farming, such as using nitrogen fertilizers that release nitrous oxide, which is another greenhouse gas, very potent greenhouse gas. And also particularly cows that release a huge amount of methane, another potent greenhouse gas, in their burps and their farts. The average cow releases enough methane every day to fill 15 party balloons full of methane. Fun fact, that's in my Brain Fizzing Facts book. So this is a lot of greenhouse gases that are being released into the atmosphere. Now, people often say, well, how do we know that it's those greenhouse gases that are causing the rise in temperature? Could it not be, for example, this top graph shows solar activity? Some people say maybe it's natural cycles or the sun, actually natural variations in carbon dioxide levels or sunspots, or something called Milankovitch cycles is often cited as like natural variations in the Earth's orbit. None of that has any kind of significant impact on the temperature rises that we're seeing. That has been proven. There's actually been proven to be a human fingerprint on the carbon dioxide that's being released from the fossil fuel burning, and on that incorporation into the greenhouse gas layer, and on the effect of that on absorbing and holding, trapping heat. And that's been proven by looking at isotopes of carbon in the atmosphere, and also looking at satellite information about heat coming out of the atmosphere and being trapped by, being trapped by the carbon. So you can see on this bottom graph that actually temperature rise almost exactly mirrors the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So it is our fault. And if we look back, over 800,000 years of ice records show that actually we're far higher in carbon dioxide concentrations today than at least the last 800,000 years. And actually other studies and models have shown that actually we have a higher level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere today than in the last 3 million years. And that temperature rise is following it. So it is our fault. It's absolutely unequivocal. There are many skeptics who try and show other sorts of graphs or other sorts of data. It's all flawed data or flawed studies. And if anyone has any of those skeptics they want to address, please do contact me and I can give you point you towards some things that can help prove and show that any arguments against this are not valid. And just to show really specifically what's been going on is that as I'm sure most of you know, the Paris Agreement was laid out a few years ago to say that we absolutely must stop greenhouse gas emissions, that we mustn't go above 2 degrees warming. The IPCC has said actually we need to stay below 1.5 degrees warming. We're currently, remember, on about 1 degree warming. And this graph just shows us that the greenhouse gas emissions are still going up really, really rapidly today, despite all these warnings and issues of climate assessments of climate sensitivities in the last 50, 60, 70 years, particularly recently. So what's going on as a result of these greenhouse gas emissions? So first of all, as I'm sure a lot of you know, we're seeing a huge increase in extreme weather events. We've actually seen twice as many extreme weather events today than in the early 90s. So the prevalence of extreme weather events has gone up, as it has doubled. This graph will show the increase in extreme weather events since around the 1970s. And let me just take a moment to explain to you why it is, actually I'll stay there for a moment, why it is that global warming, the extra heat in our atmosphere will actually change our weather. So first of all, it's kind of obvious that extra heat in the atmosphere will mean that there will be more heat waves. You can see this is 2019. 2019 had the hottest July on record, like I told you. There were 400 temperature records broken across the globe. So we'll get more extreme temperature, we'll get more sustained high temperatures. And attribution studies across the globe, there have been hundreds of attribution studies which show, we can never say, we can actually say that some events have specifically been caused by climate change, and others you can say were made up to 100 times more likely due to climate change. So that's why we get more heat, certainly, with rise in temperatures. And you can see it's not just heat, but we get huge amounts of other extreme weather events. So for example, when it gets hot, the water above the oceans gets hot. That causes more evaporation of the water from the oceans. That means if there's more evaporation, you get more water vapor in the air. Water vapor is actually held better in the air when the air is warmer. For every degree the temperature goes up, you get 7% more water vapor being able to be held in the air. Now, these two factors combined mean that actually in some areas, the hotter it is, it becomes harder to form clouds, which means that you get less rain. So hotter areas get hotter, drier areas get drier, you get more droughts, you get more water shortages. But it means in other areas, when that water vapor, which is huge saturation of water vapor in the air, when that gets blown to cooler areas or rises really high and cools down, which means we'll get more winds as well because of the changes in temperature, stronger winds and cyclones. But also when that water vapor eventually gets cool enough to condense and fall as rain, you'll get more rain and you'll get much heavier downpours. So you'll get freak storms, you'll get extreme monsoons and tropical storms and huge amounts of flooding, which, as you will know, that's what we're seeing more and more across the globe. And it's going to get much worse. The heat waves have been predicted to go up and up. We're going to get more and more heat wave. It's been predicted that by 2040, the extreme heat waves here are going to become an average summer, the ones that we've just been having. Almost all summers will be hotter than we've seen last year by 2060. And that by 2050, we'll get a trebling of heat-related deaths. And it's just going to, our infrastructure is going to suffer. We're going to have more forest fires. The forest fires like we're seeing in California and in Australia that killed 1 billion animals, those were made far more likely by climate change. And we're going to get far more extreme hurricanes like Hurricane Harvey. I've got a huge list here of like extreme weather events from 2019, but actually I'm thinking, you know what, we kind of know that. We kind of know what's happened. I've got the information here if anyone wants to read it. So the point is that this is just going to go up and up unless we do something right now. And world leaders need to be listening to the scientists. You know, we can see what's going on, everything that's happening over in other parts of the world, it's going to be happening here soon. It's already killing and displacing millions of people across poorer parts of the world, across more developing countries, but we're already seeing the impacts here in the floods in Yorkshire and the impacts on crop production. We import here 50% of our food, 70 to 80% of our fruit and vegetables. So if we get crop failure in other parts of the world, then that's absolutely going to have a knock-on impact on our lives here. Of course, the other issue with rising temperatures is you get melting ice and you get sea levels rising, not just because of the melting ice, but also because when water heats up, it expands, and that causes sea levels to rise even in the absence of melting ice. And we're now seeing that the amount of ice that's melting at the poles and in glaciers and even in the Alps amounts to, over the last 40 years, if we total it all up, it's the equivalent of 300 double-decker buses worth of ice melting every second. That's an awful lot of ice melting, and it's going to cause huge problems. The sea levels are already rising. It's thought that due to a combination of extreme weather and sea level rise, by 2050, the sorts of extreme flooding events that were previously occurring once a century will be occurring every single year. The impacts are going to be devastating. By 2050, the land currently inhabited by more than 300 million people is going to be flooding at least once a year. This is huge areas of rice-producing countries like Vietnam, huge areas of Thailand, huge areas of the UK around the coast and around rivers. And by the end of the century, it's predicted that there's going to be about 250 million people who have daily flooding and 680 million people who will have been displaced by flooding across the globe. Plus, with all the ice melting, we have loss of habitats, the polar bears are being lost. And then we've also got the impacts of the increasing temperatures on the life in the oceans itself. So we're losing fish, we're losing whales, which are hugely important to actually act as carbon sinks because their motion in the ocean allows the growth of plankton, which traps carbon from the atmosphere. And that plankton, if we lose the plankton, then that's also going to release huge amounts of carbon back into the atmosphere. The oceans actually trap more carbon than the rainforests. So we need we need all the fish, we need the whales. We're also losing a lot of our sea life due to bleaching. So we're losing the coral reefs. By the middle of the century, it's expected that 99% of the coral reefs will be absolutely gone. And there are 1 billion people whose lives depend on those coral reefs, either for food, through the ecosystem that they support, or through protection from storms, or through the tourist industry. We've also then got deforestation that produces a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions. It's currently occurring faster than 3 football fields a minute. That's just in the Brazilian Amazon. And that's making the area that ought to be absorbing carbon from the atmosphere actually become what's called a carbon source rather than a carbon sink. It's releasing carbon into the atmosphere instead. And that's a hugely worrying thing. Once that starts to happen, we could reach tipping points that tip us over into kind of catastrophic and irreversible warming, as could collapse of ice sheets, which are looking very, very unstable at the moment. Once that happens, we don't know if we'll be able to, well, we won't be able to stop it, but there will be huge amounts of warming that just haven't been accounted for by many studies. Then we've got changes in land use. Huge amounts of land is being used by agriculture to grow crops, particularly those to feed cattle. 1/3 of our crops are being used to feed cattle. Because of intensive agriculture, we've lost 50% of our topsoil, and topsoil is required for the growth of 90% of our food crops require healthy topsoil. So we're moving towards lack of soil fertility. We're also using up huge amounts of our land that could be far better used for other things. And we actually, in future years, we're going to need to grow more food to feed the growing population, but actually we're using up our land and we're producing more greenhouse gases. The currently cattle are responsible for 80% of our farmland, taking up that land, but they produce less than a fifth of our calories and only just over a third of our protein. So it's a very inefficient way to use our land. And actually they produce huge amount of more greenhouse gas emissions because of the methane in their burps and farts, and also the intensive agriculture to farm the cattle than most other forms of protein. So actually it's been said that a vegan diet, a mostly plant-based diet, is one of the best things that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Along with the other huge impact is our travel. So not flying, cutting down on cars, and using public transport where possible. It's said, well, it's not said, it's true that one international flight uses up the same amount of carbon, or sorry, releases the same amount of carbon as in 13 years of a family's home emissions from their home, from their heating and from their electrical emissions in their home. So, you know, cutting down, well, stopping flying is a very, very important thing to do. And flying from London to Rome releases the equivalent carbon, releases 4 times more carbon dioxide than doing the journey by car, 15 times more than by national rail, because most of those are still diesel, and 100 times more than by using international rail, which often uses renewable power sources now. Or if not renewable, at least ones that don't release fossil fuels. So we're also polluting our air. There's an air pollution pandemic going on, not just COVID-19. Pollution is the world's largest cause of disease and premature death. 8.8 million premature deaths a year from air pollution, more than smoking. In Europe, 800,000 premature deaths per year. In the UK, 64,000. That's 24 people dying per day just in London from air pollution. Obviously, COVID-19 has made a massive difference to that. We're also damaging our wildlife, as I'm sure you're aware, partly to do with climate change, because they're losing their habitats, because changes in the environment that they can live in, but also hugely by changes in agriculture, deforestation, changes in land use and pollution. The latest studies show that in the next few decades, 1 million species are at risk of extinction. 1 in 4 species, that is, including 25% of all mammals at risk of extinction. I mean, that is extraordinary. We've lost 60%, our population sizes of vertebrates are down by 60%. Nearly half of the mammals that have been surveyed have lost 80% of their range, like where they live. The UK is one of the worst on this. 1 in 4 British mammals are now at risk of extinction. We're losing huge amounts of our natural wildlife here in the UK. Insects are of a particular concern. They're dying out far faster than large mammals and animals. The problem with insects, not the problem, but the biggest concern is that insects are responsible for pollinating our crops. Without pollination, our crops can't survive. Without earthworms, our soil can't be rejuvenated. We've lost 80% of our earthworms, so we can't make up for the loss of topsoil. And bees are at risk of extinction, and they pollinate 70 out of the 100 most used food crops. So we should be very concerned about this. And actually scientists are now saying that we've entered the 6th mass extinction event, because extinctions are going up so rapidly, up to 100 to 1,000 times as fast as the background rate. That's the rate they should be, animals naturally go extinct. Extinctions are going up. This is an old graphic. It's actually far more than this now, but this just gives you a sort of graphical representation. So yeah, extinction rates, particularly amphibians, are going up, are 1,000 times faster than they should be. So this is extraordinary what's happening. So, you know, we are causing the loss of our ecosystems and the unraveling of what's going on, the very foundations. We rely on these creatures for our food, for our protection, for our shelter, and for knock-on effects on the rest of the ecosystem. Human health is being threatened. The rising temperatures cause an increase of spread of infectious diseases such as dengue fever and malaria. They are actually coming back in other parts of the world. We're seeing malaria come up in Europe because higher temperatures mean that they spread faster. Also, higher temperatures mean that there are changes in the distribution of animals, which can cause transmission of viruses. They can release new viruses. We don't know if that's what happened with COVID-19, but certainly there's a possibility of new diseases coming about. and the World Health Organization have said that if we were to keep to the Paris Agreement, which we're currently not, I'll come to in just one second, we could avoid 138,000 premature deaths a year just simply across the European area of the World Health Organization. So huge threat to human health. I've already mentioned threat to food. Climate change will lead to battles for food if we don't stop it. We're not going to be able to feed the growing population. With heat waves and droughts, there's going to be greater chances of crop failures that will create knock-on effects across the globe. It'll also be harder to get clean drinking water. At the moment, there are already 3.6 billion people across the globe who are in areas that are potentially water scarce. And even here in the UK by 2050, it's been said that much of the UK will face significant water deficits. Obviously there's flooding. We know there's more flooding, but more flooding means you actually get more runoff and you actually get more pollution and contamination in waterways. And actually drinking water relies on aquifers, which is different. That's why it's flooding actually doesn't produce more water. And we all know the devastating knock-on effects of flooding. We've already seen 7 million people displaced from their homes because of extreme weather in 2019, and it's going to get a lot worse. People will have to move, hundreds, maybe billions of people will have to move, and that's going to affect our management of our social structure of our world. It's going to lead to social, financial and political instability. There's some quotes here from some really important people who've basically talked about human rights, financial instability, that's Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, security threats, and instability of our very civilization. So this is an emergency, according to the most senior and the most informed people across the globe, scientists and leaders who actually are informed by the science, know that this is an emergency and we need emergency action. This is a crisis. Just because mostly the poor are suffering today, it'll be the rich that do suffer very soon if they are not already. So our warming trends show that we will get to about 1.5 degrees warming at the current rate by around 2030, and we'll get to 2 degrees warming by around 2045, 2050. The IPCC has said that we absolutely have to stay below 1.5 degrees, and that to have even a 50% chance of doing that, we need to get to carbon zero emissions by 2050. The Paris Accord said we need to stay below 2 degrees, and if we absolutely have to, and we really should stay below 1.5. But the problem is that on current projections, we're heading, this is where we're heading at the end of the century. This was before we had any climate policies in place, so we can make a difference, but current policies are still taking us towards 3 degrees, which is extraordinarily higher than the 1.5 degrees, which is deemed safe. This is by the end of the century. So we're heading for 3. Paris targets said that we needed to get down to 2. This is the pledges and targets from the government are still taking us way above 2, way too much above 2. And that's even if the governments carry on with their pledges that they've promised. We're actually heading towards 3 degrees by the end of the century, with a distinct possibility of 4 degrees. 4 degrees would be beyond imagining. There are many senior important scientists who are saying that there is a growing sense of panic about what a 4 degrees world would look like, that it would be incompatible with any global civilized global community, that it would only accommodate up to 8 billion people, and by 2100, we're heading for a population of around 11.2 billion, that there'll be global disruption, that there'll be fractured societies. Plus, we've got to factor in feedback loops, which actually mean that things might happen much faster than anyone has even been able to anticipate, such as white ice melting, exposing dark water beneath, the dark water absorbing even more heat from the atmosphere because it's darker in colour, and then actually warming up even more, and then emitting and then getting more and more and more and more. Basically, the sea ice melts. That means less of the sunlight is reflected back to space. That means more gets out into the atmosphere. That means more ice melts, and round and round. In fact, there are lots of what's called feedback loops and tipping points, points of no return, which we're dangerously close to meeting or to hitting, and we just don't know when they're going to happen. There's one in the Amazon which we could hit really any day now. So the IPCC says that what we need to do is radically transform our energy, our industry, our agriculture, but what we're and that means drastic emissions cuts by 2030 and carbon zero by 2050. And if we want that was for a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. If we want a 2/3 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, we actually would have had to bring our emissions rates down by 4% a year. If we did it now, we have to bring them down by 7.5% a year, which is an awful lot. And we're currently they're still rising. They're not coming down, despite what everybody says. It's not true. And if we carry on as we are for the next 9 years, we'll have used up all our remaining carbon budget to keep us for even a 2/3 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. And as you can see, as I showed you before, same graph, we're still going up. So I thought, okay, what can I do about this? I've done the research. The UK government is not doing what they said they would do. Out of 25 targets that were put in place to reduce emissions, an internal review showed that only one of them was being met. We're currently emitting way more carbon dioxide per head than we should, even though we're a small country. We're also embedding loads of carbon emissions in what we import. The City of London has the financial headquarters of investment banks that are investing in 15% of the global carbon emissions are from banks that have their headquarters in the City of London. We are, not investing, fossil fuel subsidies. So out of all the G7 countries, we are, where's my note on that, 1 second. We are, in the UK, we're outstripping the US and Japan in terms of how much carbon we import in products that we outsource to be made in other parts of the globe. And we are, out of all of Europe, we have the biggest subsidies of investing, subsidising, I should say, in fossil fuel projects. £2.5 billion here in the UK we spend on subsidising fossil fuel projects, mostly in offshore in less developing countries. So we are absolutely not doing what we should be doing. So I thought, okay, I have to do something about this. I cannot know all of this and in good conscience not use my skills and my passion, my skills as someone who can explain science, my skills as someone who can research and make sense of information, and my skills as someone who has a platform to be able to talk about this to different people and help people to make sure that the truth is being told, that the public understand the truth, and that the media are telling the truth, and that it's being reported on. So one of the first things I did is join with Extinction Rebellion. I helped to co-found a an affiliate group from Extinction Rebellion called Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. I was one of the co-founders. There were just 5 of us to begin with. We made a little tent at the Extinction Rebellion protests back in the autumn, and we filled it full of science information, and we got people to come along and ask scientists questions. We wrote a scientist declaration in support of non-violent direct action as the last resort of what we can do to address the climate crisis, and that's now been signed by over 1,700 scientists from across the globe to say it's not enough just to talk, we now need to take non-violent direct action, even if it goes against the bounds of the law. I talked to Extinction Rebellion and asked if I could do news reports for them. So I reported on BBC Breakfast and on BBC World News, having only just myself got to grips with the science, but wanting to make sure I got it out there. The group of scientists grew and grew. We got lots of scientists coming to join us. We wore our white lab coats. We marched through the streets of London with banners saying, "Listen to the science and tell the truth." We protested outside the Science Museum and gave talks on different aspects of the climate crisis. Here we have a row of some of the most really wonderful scientists, Professor Julia Steinberger, who's one of the co-writers of the author of the IPCC, Dr. Planetary, who's an ecologist. We've got Professor of Ecology, literally hundreds and hundreds of very well-established scientists joining us. We actually led to the first, I believe, Daily Mail headline saying Extinction Rebellion protesters are right because of our protest outside the Science Museum. We then protested outside BlackRock, an investment bank in the city that's one of the worst culprits for funding, we said, we called it Funding the Climate Crisis. That's me giving talks and being sort of moved away by the police. There's a bunch of police there, and that's our protest in the street. We lay in the road wearing our white lab coats, and eventually that happened. I got carried to the side of the road, but bizarrely, funnily enough, they didn't actually arrest me, because it seems that the police didn't really want to arrest someone wearing a white coat. I gave talks in as many places as I could find. Trafalgar Square, I just grabbed a megaphone, got up and talked. That's me talking outside the Conservative buildings, outside the Department for Education, and in various other venues, and grabbing TV cameras wherever I could find them and just trying to give interviews. And it culminated in November with this wonderful kind of exciting event where we got 100 scientists in white lab coats to gather in Trafalgar Square, and we gave talks in Trafalgar Square. So the best part of it for me was that I got to do this alongside my amazing partner, who was still fronting the samba band. And also I've now decided to devote all parts of my life to raising awareness about the climate crisis. So I spoke on a panel for the Daily Mirror, gave interviews, radio interviews for the Daily Mirror with Chris Packham about the climate crisis. I ended up doing an interview in Time Out where I got to interview Sadiq Khan about what he's doing about the climate crisis. I co-wrote and presented a Radio 4 documentary on James Hansen, a climate activist and climate scientist, on Radio 4, and I spoke on a panel for The Guardian to answer climate science questions. That's me in the same dress I'm wearing today, how embarrassing. And finally, I decided to devote the sequel to my book, Brain Fizzing Facts, to explaining lots more brain fizzing facts, but with a real emphasis, I'm writing it at the moment, on the climate crisis and helping kids to understand, but also have hope about what's going on our planet around climate and also biodiversity and wildlife. So that brings me to the part, I'm going to draw a breath, for overrun very slightly, but I think we're okay. Brings me to the part of the session now where I want to hand over to you guys, and I want to use the framework of how I've found my purpose and my excitement about helping the world to help you to identify, either for yourselves or for the clients that you work with, what is your life purpose and how can you use your skills and who you are to bring that to the new reality, to the changing planet that we're living on. So, first question is here. Now, I believe we're going to hear from Liz in a moment. So the question I would like to ask you is, first of all, who are you? So what is it that you enjoy doing? What is it that excites you? What makes you feel alive? What is it that brings you alive? Nothing to do with what you're good at necessarily, just purely who are you as a person? So Liz, if I hand over to you to manage this.
Sure. So what we've done is opened up the chat in order for you to start sharing your thoughts to Emily's questions and to build up a picture of how we connect to this particular theme. So you've seen that. Could we hold on to that first slide just for a moment?
Oh, I thought I had. Oh, sorry. Thought I had.
Who are you? What do you enjoy doing? What excites you? What makes you feel alive? If you could start connecting with us now using the chat, that would be great.
You'll just have just maybe 2 minutes to have some thoughts about that, write it down if you've got a piece of paper to grab hold of the ideas, and share it in the chat box if you will.
There's lots of themes around. Are you able to open up the chat as well, Emily? Are you able to see the chat?
Yes, give me a moment.
I'm just conscious of, I can start sharing some of those pieces. There's lots of pieces about lovely stuff about singing and dancing, humanity, vulnerability, working with others, being with people and sharing our energy with purpose. I'm a joy bringer. I want to connect people with a joy superhighway through bringing humanity to work. Lovely. There are quite a few questions in the chat, Emily, but I know that the plan is that we're going to manage questions in the cafe after this particular sessions. We have recorded and taken note of the questions that will be coming up in the last few minutes, and we'll be bringing that to Emily in that particular cafe session. Truth seeker, bringing our whole selves to work, value of compassion is critical to me. Justice, human potential, consciousness development, meditation, being in nature, enjoying being alive. There's so many pieces there that it's hard to kind of cluster everything. Some really unique pieces.
Lovely. Okay, so shall we move on to the next question?
Yeah, let's do that.
Great. So the next question is thinking now about what you can offer. So what are your skills? What are you particularly good at? Or the way that I frame it for myself, particularly because I'm very neurodivergent, and what are my superpowers? So what are your superpowers? What are the things that you are uniquely yours, that you're good at, that you can sort of offer the world, or offer your clients, or offer anything?
So again, it started to build up. So we have,
oh shoot, sorry.
Okay, listening, infusing, inclusion, communication, lots of messages around enthusiasm, facilitating dialogue, humor, encouragement, listening, empathy, kindness with challenge. Thank you, Hilary, for that. Daring to change when needed. Thanks a lot, Eva. Assisting self-acceptance, variety of life experiences, connection, positive reframes, courage, making things work, empathy and empowerment. Hey, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Listening, opening up thinking, compassion, insight, encouraging, enabling, hope. Thank you, Zoe. I can't mention everyone, but those are some of the themes that we're getting.
Okay, so let's move to the next one. And of course, my point here is that these are questions that you can be asking not just yourself, but your clients as a coach, as a way, I'm sure you do this already, but as a way to kind of hone in on the next question and how to apply them. So the next question is, of course, what matters to you? So I used my example of how I knew, first of all, what I enjoyed, then I knew what my skills were from my education and my training, but that what became clear only a year ago to me was what was actually important to me. So what are your values? What's important to you? What do you care about? What changes specifically do you want to see in the world? And again, these are questions that you could ask your clients, and specifically in the world that's changing because of the information that I've given in the earlier part of the talk.
So I'm hearing from you that there's a real important context around framing it around the challenges that we're facing into as a humanity when tackling these kind of questions with ourselves as well as with our clients. Nice. So there's some points coming in right now, that the simple things matter, care for the humanity and for the world we live in, happiness, fun, joy, freedom, kindness, mental resilience as sustainable practices for humans and planet. There's a shout out for reducing inequality, fairness, honesty, acceptance, and actions matching words. Quite a few themes around resilience and compassion and kindness. Simplicity, thank you, Louise. Being generous to each other, people being honest and making decisions that will move us forward. Thanks, Joyce. Family, friends, fairness, acceptance. Yeah, so lots of really, there's something here about the ocean, a movie of ecocentric life views and decisions from Lizzie, thank you. Courage to accept the reality, having a livable planet for our children. That seems to be coming up a few times. Thank you for that, Jim. Really appreciate it. Okay.
Brilliant. So then finally, the kind of obvious question from this then is, given all of that and given all of what we now know about what's changing on the planet, how can you use that to identify more clearly exactly how you can use your role as a coach and how you can use your clients to help to change the world? So how can you use what you've just found out from your own self-inquiry about what makes you feel alive, the skills that you have, and what's important to you in order to more clearly identify your own life's purpose, either as a coach or perhaps in some other ways as well. So just a few minutes to think, or just 1 minute maybe, to think about, does this make a difference to what you thought your role was as a coach, to what you thought your role was in your own life and your own career, or what you thought your role was as to how you can more powerfully coach others in light of the changing world of COVID-19 and of the climate and ecological emergency. So just a moment, and again, please do write in the chat if you've had any new insights, or if there's been anything in this talk that's given you a different way of seeing things, a different way of seeing your own purpose or your role you can do for others.
So we're getting quite a lot of stuff in. Enabling clients to connect to the wider world and how they can evoke positive change, encouraging people to consider the bigger picture, coach in alignment to what is really going on in the world and not in parallel. Thank you, Isabella. Annoying and offending people who won't listen about climate change. Rebellion needs confrontation. I wish I knew that. That's admin 020235. Thank you for that. Help others understand what is important and what they can do to change, influence their environment, find purpose in the collective, away from the narcissistic I, me culture, which has caused this mess. Thank you, Julia.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Helping clients to live more honestly to their values. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so some really, really thoughtful ones there. The question, there's one here from Angie. The question for me is how can I more powerfully contribute to the changing world? There's quite a lot of questions to ourselves in terms of how we can contribute right now. Encouraging others, their opinions count. Thanks, Susie. I think we're at time, Emily.
I believe so. So I just want to leave you with this powerful quote about the action. It really does make a difference, that we all make a difference. I know that I'm sure that I'm not a coach myself, but as a trainer and as a teacher and as an educator, making a difference is probably one of the most important things that we can do. And if we simply use what we have, who we are, what's aligned for us, then if we all did that, then we could make a huge difference in solving the world's problems. So I'm really, really delighted to have had this opportunity to speak with you all today. It's a huge honour to be able to talk with people like you who are already out there making a difference. You've devoted your lives to helping others. And I really hope that some of what I've shared today has been useful information or inspiration to be able to go out there and help even more people and hopefully make the world a better place for us all to live in. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll be in the cafe in a bit to answer questions.
Thank you, Emily, much appreciated. Really wonderful food for thought and very compelling. So, you know, join Emily in the cafe now. If you're joining via the app, you just need to click cafe, and you will see a link in the chat where I've added the link for those that are joining by computer to join the cafe as well. We have your questions, many of your questions that you've posted, and we'll be asking Emily these questions.
And just to say, if you would like any more information about me or to keep in touch, you can find me on my website. You can follow me on Twitter. I also have a flyer which is embedded in the app, I believe, on my profile, which will tell you a bit more about all the other talks that I offer in schools and universities and at events and one-to-one, and more information about the things that you can find that I put out into the world. So please do get in touch. If you've got questions, I'll see you in the cafe very shortly. And it's been lovely to talk to you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Wonderful. So thank you all. If you want to sign off now, we'll be leaving now, and do join us in the cafe for more discussions on this wonderful topic. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.